Welcome to This Magical Life, where we explore Druidry, mindfulness, and the magic of living. I'm your host, Philip Carr-Gomm. Hello. I just wanted to add a few words to the beginning of this video conversation that I had with Kenneth Sorensen. I put the video up yesterday of our conversation, and I can see from the comments that our communications perhaps weren't as clear as they could be. So I want to add this on at the beginning here, just to give you the context, because context is everything. Kenneth and I had this conversation completely off the spur of the moment. We'd never met before. We've been corresponding for about a year with our shared interest in psychosynthesis. And we decided to have a chat on Zoom. And at some point we hit the record button and had that conversation. And there's a risk that it will be misunderstood, I think. So I just wanted to clear this up. Just to set the record straight, to be completely clear, I believe that Trump and what he's doing with Musk and so on is just insane. It's extremely disturbing and worrying. And we talk about this. We talk about these weird salutes that Musk and Bannon have made and so on. So that goes without saying. And I've always avoided talking about politics online because there's enough of it and everybody's shooting off their own opinions. And we've got lots to absorb, and there's the real risk of overwhelm and the risk of misunderstanding and the risk of upset. And I want to stay focused on the spiritual life and on psychology. That's my interest and theme. However, I just want to make it absolutely clear how I feel in this instance. And the particular technique that I think some of the confusion in listening to what follows may come from the fact that Kenneth is talking about disidentification, and without actually explaining what it is, it's not kind of quite clear what it means. And it may sound as if we are promoting or suggesting a kind of relativistic approach, saying, well, some people think one way, some people think the other way. They both have their justifications and all the rest of it, rather than taking an ethical standpoint from the perspective of our values. And so what I want to explain is disidentification. It's a particular technique that Roberto Assagioli, an Italian psychiatrist who developed psychosynthesis, which is a kind of transpersonal psychology, he developed it as a core exercise, and it involves becoming aware of one's physical sensations, tuning in, really opening to them, allowing them, feeling them, and then saying, okay, I'm having this experience, but there's more. I am more than just this body. And in fact, at my heart, in my essence, I'm actually not this body. I'm a soul, I'm a spiritual being. And then you move to your emotions and feelings, and you experience outrage, disgust, anger, fear, resentment, all these different feelings. And again, you're not in denial about them. You accept them, you open to them, and say, okay, I feel this way, and I may well sense that I'm justified in feeling this way. I feel this way, but I'm more than this. I'm not completely identified in these feelings. There's more. So it's as if one keeps going to that question, who is the consciousness that is experiencing these body sensations or feeling sensations? And then I go to my thoughts and I observe the thoughts that are going through my mind, and I accept them, hear them, but realize that somebody is back of these thoughts, the soul, if you like. So it's a process of connecting with one's soul, one's deep self, and of not getting carried away by the mind stream or by the emotional stream like that. But it's not a way of being in denial about these things. I think that's the risk possibly in listening to the conversation that you might think. It's not about being in denial, it's about being open to all these things. And then from that, one has the possibility to engage in more rational discourse and to really consider questions. So as somebody said in the YouTube comments, it's about cooling down. The world is overheating at an environmental level. and of course, with what's happening, particularly uh, with all the current world crisis, there's a risk of overheating the passions as well, if you like. But that's not to say that we can't take an ethical standpoint. And as somebody very rightly points out, Druids in particular took they were judges, and they were the sort of ethical guardians of the tribe, if you like. So anyway, there you go. So perhaps that explains things a bit more. And do dive in and tell us what you think. Okay, bye.
Hi, Philip.
Hi. Really lovely to meet you and to be talking with you. Yeah.
Yes, likewise. And we have a short conversation here about psychosynthesis and the relevance of it for today. But the first thing I'm reminded about is, all the polarization we experience today.
Mm.
And I think that psychosynthesis is a psychology and a way of life that gives the tools, the understanding to balance and harmonize polarities. Because when we go online or just read newspapers and speak with people, we can see that everything is so heightened in tension, politically, socially. There's so many questions that we have to, in some way, be informed about. And many people, and especially young people, feel overwhelmed by all these ideological agendas we see all over. And it triggers us. Very often we become so identified with one polarity and, project the shadow on people on the other side. So we need some kind of an understanding or psychology that can help us deal with that. So we are not constantly dragged and pulled in by all these social and political agendas. And I think psychosynthesis has a very, very important tool, and that's disidentification. And disidentification is, I have a value and a principle in my own life, and that is that I try to go for the synthesis and not being pulled into a polarity, because I know that a polarity is never the whole truth. It's only a part of the truth. And it's a very challenging concept to go for synthesis, because we have to disidentify. We have to find that place within where we can let go of our attachment to the yes and no's, to our preferences, and just endeavor or try to stay a bit detached or non-engaged with even our most hardcore belief systems. And psychosynthesis put that into the very center, being able to disidentify from our belief systems and our emotions and all the impacts that are going around. And from that more neutral state, we can gather information from all the opposing sides and find a vision that, to some extent, combines the two polarities.
I think that's great. Now let's use what you've said as a really specific example. Because of the time we're talking in the time in February 2025, where it seems like psychosynthesis is psychology of the will, and it seems like strong will is being used in this rather troubling way as power over. As we speak, as it were, Trump is using this power over. He seems to be siding with the with Russia. It's as if he has this hegemonist agenda of the big boys in the room will run the show.
And we will take Greenland.
We'll take Greenland, we'll take Canada, maybe Panama.
I'm a Danish. I have to be upfront about that. We don't like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and at the same time, in the last, in the run up to this, we've seen these two examples of Musk and Bannon appearing to give Nazi salutes. And then a lot of debate, did they really mean it? Was the gesture one of sort of heartfelt inclusion? But I think the point that commentators perhaps miss is parapraxis, more commonly known as the Freudian slip, which is, in other words, whether or not they consciously meant to do that. What is their unconscious saying when they give a salute like that?
Yeah.
And even disregarding their own unconscious, what impact is that having on the consciousness of millions of people who see that and who get a particular message and the associations it has with Nazism? So it's a very peculiar time to be living through. And so I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm going to say, okay, this is all very well. You've suggested taking a psychosynthesis approach of disidentification.
Yeah,
I get it. Makes sense. But how can I not oppose and stand up for the very opposite of this bully boy tactics that seem to be this risk that America is going into this nightmare scenario of becoming a fascist state? There was a very interesting article in The Guardian a few days ago talking about how we're all in Europe kind of in a freeze response at the moment. There's this phenomenon in psychology called the bystander effect.
Yeah.
Doing nothing because, you see somebody being stabbed in the street and you're so shocked, you freeze. And you also expect other people to deal with it as well because, there are hundreds of you looking at it. So you have this funny bystander effect. Is not disidentifying from it, kind of avoiding going into some kind of denial and avoiding taking on board the awful nature of what's actually unfolding in front of us historically?
I would say if I should only speak for myself, I want to come from a place where I'm not speaking from a triggered place, from my own sub-personalities that are reacting to this bully. And it's a kind of global bully. And I don't want to come in the situation where I totally dismiss the voice of the American people because they actually elected this guy and not as a mistake because they really know who he was. We have had 4 years before. So in some way you can say it's a conscious choice. So my initial reactions to it is of course also freeze and becoming a bit anxious about the way he performed his will and his power and all the people he has surrounded himself with. But I think to really be truthful to my own value system, then it's important. I think we can definitely fight something, but fight from a more, you could say it, a more rational or enlightened perspective, where we also try to have some kind of an understanding of what is it that people like about Trump, because there is actually millions and millions of people, African American men and also women that
well, even though, yes, even despite how he's behaved.
Yeah. So there must be something good that he's doing in the eyes of his voters. And I think including that, including the needs from all these men and women that has actually put him into power is very important for me to do that.
To understand. Isn't it a question of this projection onto him of the protective father? He's Big Daddy who's going to save us. The way his election message was very simple, really. He said, I'll bring prices down.
Yes.
As soon as he's elected, he said, well, they may go up, but it takes a while and so on. But Daddy will save us. He's got the answers. He's confident. He's strong.
Absolutely, but there's also concrete. There's a concrete. The problem with the borders. Nobody in Denmark or the Scandinavian countries today would allow open borders.
Mm.
And I think we have 2015, and it was a shock, to see millions of people pouring in. And it's very important to see that immigrants will more affect working class people because they are competing for the same jobs. So they are more a threat to, you could see, the average Joe out
Of course,
there.
we see this all over Europe as well as America as well.
Yeah, the elites are not that affected by it. The elites will just, lower the price for work and get cheap labor.
Yeah.
But the working class men and women will be affected by that. So I think that's also playing into it that they. And I come from a working class background, so I in some way, I have instinctively an understanding for these issues. I lived in poor neighborhoods in my upbringing, and also when I went to Copenhagen. So I have some kind of an instinctual feel. So I have worked with this. I've tried to take the position of the American voter and see what is it that they perceive as a threat, and why. And in some way, you can say that it is a return of the patriarchy.
Yeah.
The liberal agenda has in some way, pushed men and masculinity out in the fringes in some way, and now we see some kind of a backlash.
People like Mark Zuckerberg saying something about how
he's a good example.
Masculinity or bust masculinity. So there are these. I suppose what is difficult to experience is the way all this is operating on a level of fear, threat, protection. I will protect you. I'll push him out of the way.
Yes,
it's all operating at this pretty primitive, if you want to put it that way, level on a sort of in an evolutionary sense.
I have done a lot of work to look at my own subpersonalities and the subpersonalities that were, triggered, especially with Greenland. To have someone come in, and of course. If Greenland wants to become part of USA, then it's up for the Greenlanders, But there is many hundred of years of connection between the Danes and the Inuits. So we don't take it lightly when a big bully comes from the outside and say we will just take it over. But it's important when we really have to go into a fight, then we have to understand what is triggering us. And that's where psychosynthesis is helpful, because we can, by establishing ourselves as an observer within and trying to be in conversation and in dialogue with these different inner voices that it can be fear, it can be anger, it can be so many different voices. And I think this is the first preparatory work we have to do before we can actually create an agenda for ourselves of how we want to protect our own interest. And I think a good aspect of it is that Trump's challenge to the European countries has really ignited an understanding of we have to be able to protect ourselves, to be independent from US. For too long, we have been, just letting US take over the security issues, and then we can use all the money for welfare.
Yeah.
We have in some way been exploitive toward US in that area.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? How I'm a kind of optimist by nature, and so I always try to tell myself that despite how bad things seem,
Mm.
there is some good that's coming out of it, and that indeed, as you say, may be something good that is coming out of it. And what I hear you saying is that work of psychosynthesis and other paths as well, but we're talking about psychosynthesis here, of developing more self-knowledge, so that rather than seeing a problem as only external,
Mm.
that we see what resonances does it have with us, what does Trump trigger in us, what does this situation trigger in us, and how can we work so that we're as clear as possible, so that we can then engage with the person. I mean, I thought it was very interesting seeing yesterday Macron dealing with Trump.
Yes.
Extremely skillful, the way that
Yes.
little moment where Trump tells one of his lies,
Yes.
Macron just touches his wrist and
Yes.
says, "I just need to correct you there," in a charming, warm way, which Trump receives.
Yeah.
That's what we need. It's like Macron is obviously confident enough in himself and has thought it through enough to be able to, and is sort of socially skilled enough, I suppose,
Yeah.
to be able to do that. Because of one of the things that Trump does, of course, what you see in him is you see the tyrant subpersonality,
Yeah.
narcissistic tyrant sub. And as we know, within the tyrant, there is the victim, the martyr and the tyrant are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And he uses this. You see the way he flips from being a victim. He's the subject of a witch hunt. He
Yes.
talks about people being nasty. She was nasty to me, like, oh, you poor man, and he seems to be able to channel almost like these kind of pure archetypes, the archetypal narcissist, the archetypal tyrant, the archetypal victim.
Yeah.
In a way that obviously resonates with people, and he touches their inner tyrant and their inner victim.
Yeah, and that's my point. If we don't understand why people want that, then we miss the point, and then they will vote for him again and again and again. So we have to. That's my main point here, and that's what psychosynthesis is teaching me, to have an understanding for the polarity I'm not that in connection with, and in this situation, it is the working class, the men, and all the voters that gave him the majority in all three branches, and we have to have an understanding of the needs of these people in order to have a different outcome at the next election. And because it's not just a movement we see in the US, the populist agenda is rising in Britain, in European countries. You just see the German election with the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. So it's something that is moving in the collective unconscious. And if we are just thinking about it as the deplorables, the famous Clinton projection, then we miss the point. Then we cannot include not everything they want, but we have to have a pure understanding of the basic needs that are boiling in that, in order to avoid fascism. And this is the extreme polarity of these popular movement. That's actually the strongman and fascism.
Yeah. So at some level, of course, this is working with psychosynthesis in a way that Roberto Assagioli was very interested in, wasn't he? Not only interested in individual psychosynthesis, which
Yes.
for those viewers who aren't familiar with it, can be understood as this natural, innate tendency in the psyche towards integration, synthesis, Jung's idea of individuation, self-actualization, and so on. But also, Assagioli developed a particular psychology to help to stimulate this natural process, if you like, and help work with obstacles and so on. But he was interested not only in the individual, but of course in the group as well, at a group in terms of group dynamics and couples work,
group synthesis.
Group synthesis, but also in a sort of political sense of bigger groups.
Yes.
And whole nationally, he talked about national sense. So if we're to take that agenda, how do we work with this? How you've started off by saying, okay, we look at ourselves and we see, what part of us resonates with this message and can sympathize with or empathize with or even feel the same kind of feelings and thoughts that admirers of this strong man approach feel, and we can understand their arguments rationally. I mean, one of the things I do is I deliberately get out of my bubble, and I will watch something like GB News, which in Britain is the kind of right wing,
Yes.
and I've tried it with Fox News, but it's hard to survive more than 10 minutes with Fox News. News I can do about half an hour. So, just to see completely different point of view.
Yes.
But apart from that, what else can we do?
But I think you are pointing to exactly the remedy, because after we have disidentified, and try to find a more neutral place in the service of having the widest possible perspectives on the situation. Of course, this we have to have some kind of a lens we can look at it. I sometimes use Ken Wilber's integral psychology, with the spiral dynamics, and then there are the traditional values, and this is people who love king, country, and traditional values. Men are men, and women are women, and they are actually the dominant voting group, because this is all the working class and some of the middle class who are embedded in these values that are runs many years back. And then there are the more liberal values, the individual values of modernity, and they are pretty much aligned with freedom, the freedom agenda, freedom of speech, and on all that. And then we have the progressives, the more postmodern groups. They are in many ways trying to reach out to all the marginalized group, LGBTQ and minorities, racial minorities. And we have to, in some way, find a place in our hearts for all those different types of people that are embedded in different value systems. And if we can embrace them and have that inclusive and see where they are coming from, then we can, in some way, speak to them and include the most essential values in some kind of a synthetic vision of the way forward. We run into problem when we only align and identify with one set of values and discard the others, because people are identified with these values and they act and vote from these values. So I see an integral understanding of these where we don't dismiss them. And of course, the most pathological, every value system and every meme or what have their pathological disturbances that we have to look out for. But I think that's a way forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's so. And so you can look at, I would, at the heart of I would say, I'm trying to avoid appearing elitist or whatever, but at the heart of people who populist voters and so on, they have these values of they don't want people to suffer. They want to look after people and to be inclusive. It's only, as you said, the pathological extremes where they want to actually destroy and hurt.
Yeah.
So, but would you say that? I remember, I think it was Carl Jung who said, at any time on the earth, there's 1,000 years of sort of psychic development within humanity, and this risks sounding elitist, but I'll say it anyway. Do you think that the progressives are perhaps, we're just more sophisticated, more advanced in an evolutionary sense from the populists, being blunt about it. And we just have to accept the fact that not everybody is going to be at the kind of cutting edge of evolution.
Yeah, I agree, because that's part of the spiral dynamic version of it, that the progressives are in some respect more inclusive. And when we speak about development, we have to see that the perspectives that include most people and their needs are the most developed.
Yeah.
So the more heart space, the more developed. But some of the progressive, actually, they speak about the values, but you can be very religious about progressive values. So you will not accept any people who don't have the same thoughts as you have. And then you have a progressive in a traditional disguise in some way, because you become very intolerant.
Yes,
And
you have to cancel all the cancel culture. And
yes.
yeah.
So it's not that simplistic, that you are just including all the marginalized group and then you are on a higher level. No, it's also how you show respect for people who don't share your worldview. I think that's the big test. And we can have a traditional people who are generally very good people and want to help their neighbor, and so I think it's more complex than that.
Than simply some kind of hierarchy of spiritual evolution, and that the more evolved you become, the more progressive you become, the less evolved, the more traditional you are. It's not as simple as that.
No, it's not as simple as that. I like to there are arguments for both, but I like to just see them more in a horizontal band.
Okay.
And then, the I is above it. The disidentified I, you can step out of these values, or you can try to.
Yeah.
And then you can see, okay, I have a sub-personality that has bias against certain people, because that's part of, the ethnocentric level in you. We come from a tribal past, all of us. And part of that tribalism in us is about protecting our tribe. We know that many of the tribes in the US were wiped out by diseases from the invading Europeans. So these instinctive, self-protective energies have a place in nature. But, we are not going to that place in us if we want to create a good and loving atmosphere for everybody. Then we have to go to the more mature aspects of us, where we include more see people as individuals, judge them by the character of their personality, and not by their skin color or their tribal affiliations. So we have all these levels inside of us, and we cannot say that the instinctive levels are definitely bad. They are just not that evolved.
And it's also, I think, a question, don't you, of accepting the fact that we can have a variety of feelings and that they can coexist.
Exactly.
So at one level, we can want to, if I take my position of being in England on the South Coast, we can want to repel the boats that are coming, towards us. But at another level, completely embrace refugees and accept that life is incredibly difficult for them, and welcome them to my country. So accepting the fact that there's another part of me that wants to say, no, that's enough, stay back.
Yes.
And I think we tend to think that we can only have one feeling. I either like you or I don't like you. I either hate something or love something. But actually, you can feel both things about somebody at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. Sort of. So it's about opening your heart, really, and broadening your acceptance of the sort of richness of the human experience.
Yeah, and I think that's where psychosynthesis really have an important role to play, because it teaches us to find that place where we can be the observer, where we can be identified with consciousness itself. And that is consciousness without content. All the feelings, all the voices in our head, all the instinctual impulses, this is content in our consciousness. But we can actually find that this place within where we can sit with it, embrace it, and investigate it, and know that, okay, I have a feeling, but I'm not my feeling. I have this voice that is telling stuff in my head, but I'm not this voice. I can be this loving witness to whatever emerges and own it. And then from that point of view, we can decide what voice and impulse in us are we going with in a particular situation.
We can then use our will in a good
Exactly.
way, in a skillful way, and so on.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point, maybe for us to close with, because
Yeah.
it's very specific and concrete. If I can just tease it out a bit, and it goes like this: that one of the big problems I think that faces us when we see what's happening in the world is that feeling of disempowerment and overwhelm and anxiety.
Yeah.
And quite a common reaction I find amongst people is to say, I don't watch the news. I'm just not, I can't take it anymore. I'm not watching the news. I'm not listening, and so there's this feeling of denial, or, the ostrich with their head in the sand and all the rest of it. And then other people will say that however much I want to do that, I have to, keep my eyes open and see what's going on, even though it upsets me. But what psychosynthesis is offering is really saying, look, you don't, if you do this work of disidentification, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, that there are a number of exercises and so on within psychosynthesis where you basically get to know your feelings and your thoughts, and you accept them. And you also find a place within you, the I, the still center, which is the point where you can, the point of the soul in the final analysis, but also the personality, the still center, if you like, and then the personality built around it. And that this is a place where not only you can find kind of spiritual nourishment and calm and stillness, but you can then contact, as you said, Kenneth, being contentless, this idea that there's nothing there. And rather than that being scary, it's beautiful, but there's no thing there. And so from that place, you can then feel aligned with your soul, and then you can choose to act in the world in the most appropriate way, and so on. So it's actually empowering. So it gives you the benefit of the ostrich, in as much as you take a step back, so you don't have to be overwhelmed. It deals with the overwhelm problem by allowing you just to take this distance. But also you're not in denial. You're actually more fully present to the situation, actually, ironically.
Informed.
You're informed, you're aware, but you're not overwhelmed, because you've identified with your true center, which is somehow beyond this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that gives us a very kind of specific work to do that can be of value to us for our own mental health and physical health, but also perhaps in inviting us to relate to the world and act in the world in a positive way.
I agree fully.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We started this conversation with just let's see where we go, and we went straight to this topic, which was so interesting. I very much look forward to talking to you again, Kenneth. Explore the magic of Druidry and the spiritual life with Philip Carr-Gomm. Visit philipcargomm.com for resources, books, and online courses that support your spiritual growth.